Welcome to you all. Let's discuss all of these issues and more. Judge Carmel Adjus, as I just said, you served as president of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. When you look at the situation in Gaza today, and as we've just been saying, the issue of the moment, the critical issue today when it comes to the legal framework, is the decision made, somewhat belatedly, some would say, by the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants for two top Israeli leaders and some Hamas leaders. The former defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, but also the current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. First, let me ask you, as a judge, did you expect that it would take so long for these three judges of the ICC to finally act on the application made by the prosecutor, Karim Khan? And secondly, now that they have, how do we implement it?
Thank you for the question. One of the big problems that has besieged the ICC is the way investigations are carried out, arrest warrants are issued, and proceedings are started. There is an enormous departure from the way that the ICTY and the Rwanda Tribunal, for example, were using. And these differences are crucial. For example, let me give you a simple example. At the ICTY, I wouldn't know as a judge, and also all the other judges wouldn't know if the prosecutor is investigating someone. We wouldn't know. But at a certain point, one of us could receive a dossier with a request for confirmation of an indictment against a particular person, and also either simultaneously or subsequently to issue an arrest warrant. The arrest warrant is issued by the judicial authority, by the judge. And this is carried out by just one person who will study the dossier. And of course, if it's a couple of hundreds, you read it, you go through it in less than a weekend. If it's a lengthy and complicated one, you take more time. But basically, confirmation of indictments before the ICTY used to be concluded in a very short time. Then you had a question of whether the indictment was to remain sealed or whether it was to be made public.
Are you surprised at how long it took in this case?
I am a bit surprised in a way and not surprised in another, because as I said, I know that the system at the ICC is not conducive to have these procedures concluded within a very short time. This creates problems, multiple problems, as you can see at the current moment, because the situation in Gaza and in Ukraine, the situations are very critical. And when you are faced with a critical situation, the remedy of the issue of confirmation of an indictment or the issue of an arrest warrant becomes a matter of urgency.
Let me ask you a practical question before we move on. So as important as it is to have these indictments, not just is it hugely symbolic, but it's an important legal moment as well. How significant is it if they will remain unenforceable? How do you enforce these arrest warrants?
Listen, this is also...
In a world where, political pressures exist in abundance.
This is a big problem also with the ICC. Unfortunately, the ICC has been operating since 2002. Basically, you can start counting from 2005. Overall, the number of indicted persons that have been tried is just 26, and 11 of those have been acquitted. But you know what? There are 30 more fugitives. There are indictments against them, there are arrest warrants against them, and they remain at large. Some have been at large for more than 10 years, some even more than that. For example, Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi. He has been on the run since 2012, something like that. Some of the Russian officers that were indicted in relation to the events that happened in Georgia are still there. The indictments are there, the arrests are there.
Yeah.
So it's not symbolic, no, it's tragic.
Yeah.
It's tragic having 30 persons, all at large, and number-wise they are more than the persons that you have tried in roughly 20 years, is a sad situation. Still, I believe in the ICC. In other words, I am critical, but I have hope in the ICC, and I have faith in the ICC.
Well, it's tragic, but you remain hopeful, which
Yes.
is important. Professor Yüksel, looking at what we have seen from the ICJ, which is the only international court in the world that adjudicates these disputes between nations, we have seen a drive by some of the smaller nations, you know, the less important nations, politically speaking, shall we say, from the global south, take on the established status quo, starting with South Africa, and others have followed. They took on the case of genocide against Israel at the ICJ. Can the legal case brought by them, do you think, lead anywhere, given the position of the United States and other powerful countries that continue to shield Israel from any accusations?
Let me start actually saying that we are at a critical turning point in the field of international law, especially international humanitarian laws as well. And since the developments of October 7, 2023, actually, I think require us to think deeply about the effectiveness, fairness, legitimacy, and future of international law and international humanitarian laws. So I think what distinguishes the double standard in the case of especially Gaza from many other cases of selective application of international law is that it is too brutally obvious to deny and too difficult to obfuscate and too arbitrary to rationalize. So I think Gaza is more than a humanitarian crisis at this stage. It's a crisis of humanity. When you consider death of 45,000 civilians, including more than 17,000 children and more than 12,000 women, I think at this point Israel is openly committing genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes just like Nazi Germany did. So I believe this genocide in Gaza is not just merely the result of recent events post-October 7th, 2023, but somewhat culmination of Israel's 75 years of apartheid, 56 years of occupation, and 16 years of blockade against Palestinians. So this, at this stage, when we look at especially South Africa's application, when South Africa filed a lawsuit against Israel at the International Court of Justice, seeking also provisional measures for violations of the Genocide Convention. I think while the ICJ is independent, but it relies on the UN Security Council for enforcement, which has hindered actually the impact of the ICJ rulings. For example, despite provisional measures in January, March, and May 2024, ordering Israel to cease genocidal acts in Gaza, Israel has not complied, as you know. So here, the US and Israel have, as you know, criticized the case, with the US using its veto power to block actions against Israel. So the ICJ's rulings are legally binding, but challenging to enforcement, just like you mentioned for the ICC.
But so what can individual countries, Professor, like Turkey and others, what can they do? You mentioned the close relationship, obviously, between the United Nations and the ICJ. The ICJ is an important pillar of the UN. It's an important organ within the UN. But what type of actions can individual governments, like yours, take to change things? We've heard President Erdogan say for many years there needs to be reform of the whole United Nations system, the Security Council. But it has been talk by many nations for many years. How do you turn that into concrete action? Can you?
Actually, back to your question, if the genocide case against Israel gains support from non-Western countries like Turkey, like Bolivia, Colombia, Mexico,
Nicaragua.
Chile, Nicaragua, all these countries actually have intervened already. I think this could lead to a shift in international law and humanitarian action. So in every meetings, actually, whether it is multilateral meetings or international organizations, we encourage all the other countries to intervene in this case. So the outcomes might include a decline in Western dominance with non-Western nations playing a larger role in shaping global norms and stronger enforcement of international law. And as you just said, potential reforms in the United Nations system to address power imbalances. So ultimately, I think the genocide case could mark a pivotal moment advocating for fairer application of international humanitarian law and greater accountability for human rights protection.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Yüksel. To you, Professor Badar. We've been talking both about the legal system from an ICC perspective, holding individuals accountable, and the ICJ, holding nations to account. When you look at both these mechanisms of international law, which do you think ultimately is able to deliver justice? In other words, can you achieve international criminal justice and prevent future gross violations of human rights in conflicts if you only hold individuals accountable when individuals are pursuing state policy in many instances?
Thanks again, Ms. Gida, and thanks for TRT for this kind invitation. And I will now look for the future generations, if you allow me to answer this question. First of all, I have to say in 1974, 1970s, if you would like to go to the International Court of Justice to see any case, there was no cases. Look now how many cases before the International Criminal Justice, the International Court of Justice. How many cases now? Even if you will go, you will not be able to attend because it's so busy. So from 1970s to 2024, I think that the international criminal justice is moving forward. International justice is moving forward. However, and this was a question also often asked, but what about all these provisional measures by the International Court of Justice, the World Court, which is different, like Ms. Rida said, than the International Criminal Court? Both, they are in The Hague. It's the implementation and the enforcement, but we shouldn't lose hope. We have one advisory opinion request from the General Assembly. That is very important also to say that the General Assembly was so active in this conflict. The General Assembly asked the International Court of Justice, I need advisory opinion on this prolonged occupation. We are talking about more than 60 or 70 years occupation. And the International Court of Justice has to say, International Court of Justice is writing history. Back again, the enforcement of the provisional measures. Yes, I have to say, Israel didn't look at any of the provisional measures. We have also one provision that, yes, Israel, you have to stop incitement to genocide and you have to punish those who incited to genocide. Israel will not look at, but it was big threat to Israel. Take care, if you continue incitement for genocide, a case will be built on you. They are going parallel now. We have at The Hague, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court going parallel. One, like Ms. Rida said, International Criminal Court, individual criminal responsibility. Yes, we have now individual criminal responsibility. We have arrest warrant against senior officials. I am from the Middle East. I was in Egypt 4 or 5 days ago. People were surprised. It's really happening. Yes, it took incredibly long time. Why? Because we lawyers, we know how to interrupt justice. United Kingdom, there are some lawyers representing United Kingdom, they went and they filed during the arrest warrant process that, please, pre-trial chamber, don't issue arrest warrant because the ICC has no jurisdiction on Palestine. Something I said, they tailor something, they fabricate something. Even though with all this delay, the pre-trial chamber managed to issue arrest warrant. Back to the question, individual criminal responsibility and state responsibility. I have to say, and I will stop in 2 minutes, look at crimes against humanity. In order to prove crimes against humanity, you have to prove for the International Criminal Court statute, we name it the Rome Statute, that there is a state policy or organization policy. So if you prove it, it directly means that if Muhammad Badr committed crimes against humanity, I also belong to X state, so this X state will be also implicitly there. But the International Criminal Court is not dealing with with state responsibility, it's the International Court of Justice. So we have two parallel cases, the same that happened, Bosnia-Herzegovina. They took Serbia to the International Court of Justice for genocide after 11 years. We have a decision from the International Court of Justice. At the same time, we have Srebrenica genocide. And I will stop here. And you remember, in July 1995, General Mladic, during Srebrenica genocide, he said, we took the revenge, and no one expected that Milosevic, Mladic, Karadzic will appear. Like my senior colleague, judge here, it will take time, but we shouldn't lose hope. Thank you.
You say we shouldn't lose hope, and I know you address yourself mostly to the younger generation of future leaders who may be sitting here today, who have been, let's be honest, over the last few years, disillusioned with the international order, the global system, and a huge ingredient in that, a huge pillar, is obviously justice and accountability. You say we've seen so many people in the dock that we didn't expect. I wonder if you expect to see someone as powerful and seemingly completely immune as Netanyahu in the dock someday, and Judge Edges called it tragic. Many other people are calling it a farce. That's in reference to international law. How do you look at it?
I'm not sure if Netanyahu is 76 years old now, he will stay till maybe 5 or 6 years, but I will give a big surprise. It never happens that we have something trial in absentia before International Criminal Court. Only Special Tribunal for Lebanon, they apply their own law. Few months ago, the International Criminal Court issued a decision that based in Uganda, a senior figure, there is something called confirmation of charges, will happen during his absence. Back again in 1 minute to say what I'm saying, not to lose focus. Trial in absentia is not accepted in international law. However, we have, after the arrest warrant of Netanyahu and others, something called confirmation of charges. There is no trial. The trial will come after 1 year, if it happens. Confirmation of charges, and here history will be written. Everyone will bring the case and evidence before the International Criminal Court. The defense of Mr. Netanyahu and others, and the prosecutor, he has his own people to bring. Everything will be watched public, and the history will be written, and all the massacres against the 45,000 Palestinians who died will be evidence at the court. However, even if Mr. Netanyahu will not appear before, will not be arrested, based on this precedent in Uganda case, the trial chamber or the pretrial chamber should go in his absence. What I am really concerned, not about one person, I'm concerned that the history will be written and the evidence will be shown to everyone, and the state who was victim of Holocaust is committing genocide.
So you think we will see justice? Quite often, justice delayed, justice denied. That's what people feel. But you think justice will be served one way or the other, eventually?
It has been served for me, yes. And it's history that we have arrest warrant for the first time after 70 years, Ms. Rida. There was no accountability for any senior official for 70 years. It just happened a few weeks ago. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Omar Suleiman, when we look at the current state of the world and the legal system, especially with regards to Palestine and the Middle East, it's difficult not to see the hugely significant, but some would say nefarious, and highly hypocritical role of major powers like the United States. Right. And I address this to you, being a civil rights activist in the US. When you look at the protest movement, especially from the younger generation of students on many of the leading US campuses, but the crackdown that also followed, right, the pressures that were applied on some of the heads of those schools who were forced to step down. How did you live that moment, and how significant is it in putting pressure eventually on the US government?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to respond, but also tie the response into the answer to that particular question. I love the optimism of my co-panelists, and I say this with utmost respect, and it's not even a refutation. I hope they're right. But I also would say that the Palestinian people have absolutely zero hope in anything outside of God and then themselves. They have been failed by every... To this moment, they've been failed by every single international system of accountability. Now, what that means is not that we should discount the significance of these moments, but to say that there's a difference between a symbolic victory and a substantive victory, and a symbolic victory should be taken at face value for what it is up until this point, until these warrants are enforced, until Israel is actually brought to justice. And let's be clear, the problem is not Netanyahu alone, the problem is Israel. So until these war criminals are brought to justice through these international mechanisms, then most of us will simply take it as political theater until we are proven wrong, and we would love to be proven wrong. But until we are proven wrong, we will take it as another symbolic victory, and we will factor it in to the overall progress of the global Palestinian movement and the awareness movement for the rights of Palestinians, while thanking and showing gratitude to our brethren in South Africa and to those that have tried to enforce what are supposed to be international legal norms. And so for me, I take it, it's almost like when you're a child growing up and you realize that professional wrestling is scripted and staged. I think that's how most people feel about international systems of law, so long as they're held hostage by the United States, so long as the United Nations is held hostage by the United States veto. We don't believe in these systems. With that being said, I think that young people are taking to the streets, they're taking to their college campuses. They are innovating in inspiring ways to show that they will not be silenced by the legal crackdowns in the United States, by the enforcing of draconian law in the United States to strip them of their freedom of speech on behalf of the Palestinian people. What I saw on those college campuses was not only inspiring and encouraging because of the zeal that I saw in those students, but also how flustered the authorities were in the face of those encampments. They did not anticipate that the students that they have taught to speak up would actually speak up against them and take to their campus lawns. These students were supposed to be cultured into the same systems and ways of thinking that those campuses have enforced. And when those students rebelled against campus norms, it left them deeply troubled. They didn't know what to do with themselves. You also could not tarnish those students as the Islamic radicals, because in some of those encampments, the majority of the students were actually Jewish. And almost all of them, the majority, were not even Muslim. Certainly, none of them were majority Palestinian. And so you couldn't taint the spirit of those campus protests. And so what we are seeing now, and what I find encouraging, is that the aura of Israel's invincibility is being shattered. And the hypocrisy.
Is it though? And to what extent? Because I was about
Symbolically.
to ask you, how much of a crack are we beginning to see in that almost unshakable support for Israel? You know, it's more than support. It goes even to, I guess, being described as devotion in many instances on both sides of the aisle. How shakable is that alliance? And I want you also to sort of allude to the important role of the US media in the way they've portrayed Palestinians over the years, the dehumanization of women and girls and men.
Sure.
And how these two go hand in hand in breaking, in many ways, as you say, the hold that the pro-Israel lobby has on US politics and the rest of it.
Well, look, at some level, there has never been a moment in our lifetimes where there are more people saying free Palestine than right now. And so that is a cause for hope, that the streets of the world are loud, and the silenced streets in the Muslim world and beyond, where governments do not allow the people to say free Palestine, their hearts are beating for a free Palestine. And so we're seeing a global movement for Palestine like never before, and that is a cause for hope. Now, when you talk about the genocide and you talk about the crimes of the state of Israel, you cannot exclude the United States. And I will start believing in these systems when Joe Biden is prosecuted, even if posthumously, for his role in this war crime, for his role in this atrocity. When Antony Blinken is treated like gallant, then I will believe in these systems. And so in this day and age, what we see right now, you know, bless his heart, Sam Husseini, hounding Matthew Miller in every single press briefing and not letting him get away with his hypocrisy is necessary. We have to make tyrants uncomfortable with their tyranny. We have to make power uncomfortable with its hypocrisy. We have to expose it so much so that the average American connects their domestic frustrations of not being able to have a livable wage with the destructive foreign policy of the United States empire. Those connections are being made, and so as much as you are seeing both parties dig their heels into this loyal support of Israel, you are seeing that support within both bases is starting to actually crumble on the left and even surprisingly on the right. And so the facade has been exposed. Gaza has put every single international norm on trial, and in the process has shattered everything that we used to take as orthodoxy.
Michael Link, last but not least, is this a moment of truth for the international global system, for the world order, for every government in the world? You are someone who very closely documented the daily lives of Palestinians under Israeli occupation for many years as Special Rapporteur for the United Nations. You were preceded by Richard Falk and John Dugard. You were succeeded by Francesca Albanese. All of you serve as independent UN experts for 6 years. How would you describe what is going on in Palestine today? Are you surprised by the deafening silence of the entire world?
Of course I'm astonished, and I'm sure most people in this room would be taken aback by the scale of the destruction, the scale of the suffering, the scale of the death and wounded. I was one of those who thought in late November, early December 2023, surely this is going to be a ceasefire by the end of December. There's too much death, too much destruction, too many blatant violations of international law. Who around this table really would have thought that we'd be sitting here almost 14 months later with a death toll of approaching 45,000 people, of over 2 million Gazans, Palestinians in Gaza, who have been displaced once, twice, 10 times with respect to this, with a pitiful amount of aid entering into Gaza, even though there are hundreds of trucks full of humanitarian aid waiting outside of Rafah or Khorasherim entry point. How many people would have thought that the world, and primarily the global north, the United States, Canada, Europe, would have sat so passively beside this? Yes, there's been some small movement. Some European countries, Canada, have restricted some arms shipments with respect to this. But in terms of a comparison between how the global north has treated the Russian invasion of Ukraine with the Israeli genocide in Gaza, is an astounding gap in terms of reaction. And this doesn't condemn international law. I want to make it clear that I think international law provides us with most of what we wind up needing. But international law doesn't have its own judges. International law doesn't have its own army. It needs international political resolve in order to be able to put into effect all of the great humanitarian and human rights and criminal aspects that we've created for this international legal architecture over the last 80 years. And that hasn't happened, and that hasn't happened primarily because of the global north. I can't think of another conflict in the modern world as Israel and Palestine, where the gulf, the chasm between the global north and the global south is so stark, is so bare, and is so painful to wind up watching.
As a legal expert, let me ask you, would you use terms like genocide and ethnic cleansing to describe what is going on without having to wait for a ruling from the World Court? Would you use these terms to describe what is going on? And how important is it to use these terms in order to hold some of these countries that you referred to in the global north accountable for violating these laws, for continuing to fund this so-called war on Gaza, to continue to provide these weapons, quite often in violation of their own domestic laws?
You've put your finger on the hole in the heart of the international legal system that we wind up having now, and that is the issue of accountability or the lack thereof. I devoted 3 of the 12 reports that I issued as Special Rapporteur between 2016 and 2022 with respect to accountability obviously with respect to Israel, but why hasn't that accountability been imposed by those in the global north? And the answer is they can live with it. They have wound up ignoring their own laws. We have plenty of provisions in international humanitarian and human rights law that holds accountability. It's right there in Common Article number 1 of the four Geneva Conventions. It's right there in the 2001 Articles on State Responsibility. It's right there in Article 25 and Article 6 of the Charter of the United Nations. So let me say something provocative here, if I'm allowed to in this audience. Does Israel deserve to maintain its membership in the United Nations? Article 25 of the Charter of the United Nations says that every member state must obey every decision of the UN Security Council. There are over 30 resolutions over the last 45 years that Israel has disobeyed, has defied with respect to the Israeli settlements, with respect to the annexation of East Jerusalem, with respect to the application of the Fourth Geneva Convention as an occupying power. Israel has defied all of those. We have to go a step farther and look at the role of the United States. The United States has vetoed approximately 50 resolutions over the last 50 years that are critical of Israel. No other permanent member of the United Nations Security Council has vetoed even one resolution critical of Israel during that period of time. And when the United States allows resolutions of the Security Council to pass with respect to the annexation of East Jerusalem, with respect to the application of the Fourth Geneva Convention, with respect to the illegal Israeli settlements, the United States uses its authority to ensure those resolutions are not put into effect. So Article 3 of the 1948 Geneva Convention says it is illegal to be complicit in a genocide. So if you are the country that supplied, according to conservative figures, $22 billion in aid since October 7th, military aid, if you are the permanent member of the Security Council that has vetoed 6 resolutions proposing ceasefires since November of 2023, and even allowing a resolution to go through in June of 2023, which said instant and endurable ceasefire, immediate release of the hostages, no Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip, and you let that die on the vine. What does that say with respect to responsible diplomacy today?
I think you put your finger on it and obviously echo what a lot of people feel about the state of affairs in today's world. We just have a few remaining minutes, and I would love to get each one of you's concluding thoughts on where we are today, but more importantly, where we go from here. So to you first, Judge Aegis, you heard Michael Link lay bare the reality of the world today. Let's face it, in the face of such obstruction of law, shall we call it, by the United States and its allies, how much chance for any meaningful law to be implemented?
Well, let's stand firmly with our feet on the ground. The current situation as it is today, it is very bleak. It looks really bleak and discouraging. But I worked in a tribunal where we never, or let's say, we were not very hopeful to get Milosevic. We were not very hopeful to get Karadzic. We were not very hopeful to get Mladic, and we got the 3 of them.
But you didn't have the United States against the idea of getting them.
No, we didn't have the United States again, and that is a problem. And it's not just the United States. This is why I say that the current situation is somewhat bleak, because even inside the EU, suddenly seem to appear some cracks. statements made by France recently after a deal was reached for the
In
Lebanon
Lebanon.
ceasefire shook quite a few people, including myself. And there were outright condemnations or criticism by, for example, Amnesty International, almost immediate, by Human Rights Watch, almost immediate. But those who have a little bit of an eagle eye and try to feel what's happening inside the EU don't go home today with the conviction that there is complete uniformity and the EU is adamant on what's going to be. But one further thing, we are focusing more on the international scenario. And the international scenario is extremely important because obviously there's no way Netanyahu can be arrested and brought to justice unless he leaves his country. But international politics is very tricky, can be very tricky. And things can happen in one's own country that will change the situation completely. Milosevic wasn't captured by the Americans or by anyone else. He was basically sold by political adversaries at a crucial time when he least expected it. And there you are. Gingic, who was president at the time or prime minister at the time, probably, as they say, orchestrated the surrender, and he came to The Hague. You never know what can happen in Israel, and Netanyahu is not someone that has always enjoyed 100% support in his own country. His popularity has increased recently, but you have no guarantee as to what can happen.
But just yes or no, given the way he has been so untouchable over the last several years, certainly over the last year, do you expect to see him in The Hague, yes or no? Or even tried by a censor?
I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
If he does, okay.
I wouldn't be surprised because history has taught us a lot of things and can repeat itself.
Okay. All right. Professor Yüksel, to you, I mean, this is the reality, but when you look at global politics and the fact that countries like the United States can put such a strong, and many European countries, we just heard about the case of France this week, which said that it would not implement the arrest warrant against Netanyahu, trying to find all sorts of justifications, you know, through some kind of, shall we call it, legal gymnastics. Do you expect that there could be a coalition of countries like Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, other important developing countries that could put together a united front to change the dynamics, to change the global order, to change the paradigm?
Yes, I think actually the primary reason, you know, for Israel's war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide is its perception of impunity. And where this comes from, it comes from the Western actually establishments like the United States, the European countries. But now this impunity is being challenged through decisions by the ICC, decisions by the ICJ, and countries like Turkey, for example. We believe also the next step in addressing this impunity should be Israel's suspension or expulsion from the United Nations, just like Michael actually suggested. Now, under our President Erdogan's leadership, Turkey remains committed to ensuring Israel is held accountable both in the court of international law and the global conscience, continuing to support legal processes at the ICC, at the ICJ, and within the United Nations.
But just briefly, how will Turkey do that? Will it take any decisive, bold actions that it hasn't done before?
First, by intervening, for example, in ICJ. And second, with many lawyers, Turkish lawyers, we all went to the ICC with our dossiers, with our evidences, with our documents. Now, I want to be specific, for example, with our proposals about some solutions. One solution was actually we just wrote a letter to United Nations Security Council, as you know, for arms embargo on November 1st, along with 52 countries, the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And one other thing, for example, when you have the system of veto in United Nations Security Council, when our president says the world is bigger than 5, actually now when there's a deadlock in the Security Council, we have to pass this deadlock, like in history we did it actually, with the Uniting for Peace resolution. Just we did in 1950. And Turkey was one of the countries who drafted this Uniting for Peace resolution. Although right now there is the ongoing meetings in the United Nations General Assembly, but our proposal is actually to have this Uniting Peace resolution with using force. Because when diplomacy, law kind of come to end, then you have to have that to be able to use force.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Professor Badar, your thoughts. We have the resolutions, we have the initiatives, we have the laws. What is missing besides the mechanisms of implementation? And where is the Arab world? Where are Arab governments? Why don't we hear enough from them?
Thanks again, Gida, and I've tried to make it in 1.5 minutes. What is missing is us. We, the lawyers, we are not in this frame. We are looking at the International Criminal Court, International Criminal Justice. Imagine there was no International Criminal Court. Would we stay silent? We are missing our domestic law, how to use our domestic law to hold others accountable. We have something called, and I used to say it in all my conferences for the past 2 years, there is something called treaty-based crime. Genocide is treaty-based crime. Yes, genocide is treaty. And there is the obligation for states, whenever genocide took place, you have obligation to prosecute. Leave now prosecutor Karim Khan with all these 15, 18 cases. He's doing his best. What about us? We have the convention, United Nations Convention against Torture. There is obligation to prosecute. The Latin terms called aut dedere, aut judicare, either to extradite or prosecute. Other crime which we never mentioned, I don't know why, apartheid, al-tamyiz al-unsuri. There is apartheid in Palestine. It's not mentioned. You know why? Because the 120 countries signed the apartheid convention. Not Canada, not United Kingdom, not United States, not UK, they are afraid to sign this apartheid convention. In the apartheid convention, you have obligation, you have a provision that you can prosecute using universal jurisdiction. We are missing to activate our domestic law. We are missing our law activated. You are the generation to activate it, and we are witnessing you activate your law, use your law to hold others accountable. Universal jurisdiction, you can use it even if the crime didn't take place in Turkey or in Egypt. Still, you can use it to bring all this treaty-based crime at least and do it in absentia. So I'm talking about bottom-up approach at this stage and leave the international justice to continue. But we have something to do. We are not doing it till now. But thanks for Turkey. And I will stop here with one quote for the president of Turkey yesterday. He said, crises create opportunities. We have the opportunities, not me. We are old. You have opportunities. with this crisis, with this Nakba, use it, international relations, write, publish, let the people know. And I'll stop here, and what's going on is not genocide, it's called also Nakba. Nakba, what's going on, it's beyond genocide in Palestine. It's called Nakba. That's the second Nakba going now. Sorry for this long answer. Thank you.
Well, on this inspiring note for everyone to feel like they not only have a stake in what is going on and what kind of world we shape for our futures and for future generations, but we also have a role. In today's reality, certainly in the Middle East, there's so much you can say about the margin that is available to the young generation to have political say, but there is increasing economic power, isn't there? Dr. Suleiman, your final thoughts when you look at these last few months in the United States, but in every Western capital in the world where young people have taken to the streets with protest movements, activist movements, boycott movements that have worked. Apartheid South Africa crumbled because of all the pressure that was put on it. Could we see the same in the case of Palestine?
Absolutely, thank you. And I just want to say that, there's incredible legal knowledge that's on this panel that I don't possess. I can only speak to what I'm inspired by in the streets of the United States and all over the world. Look, Israel is trying to bomb itself into legitimacy. And in the process is just demonstrating to the world how illegitimate it actually really is. And those that try to defend its legitimacy and use the instruments of power like the United States has, are only making their own institutions illegitimate in the process. United States corporate media has become a joke as far as most Americans are concerned, and this is one of the reasons why. You have to stop believing in the institutions that have masqueraded as vehicles of delivering justice to the oppressed in order to reimagine new possibilities. And what young people are doing around the world is they are taking to the streets to insist that if the Palestinian people have been made faceless, we will not allow them to make us voiceless. That just as they have sought to confiscate the land of our people, they are seeking to occupy our discourse, to set for us the boundaries of our protest as they seek to set boundaries for our resistance to this monstrosity, to appropriate our symbols, to tell us we can't draw the maps the way that our parents drew maps, that we can't use the words that our parents used. And when we insist on these symbols, and when we insist on our discourse, and when we insist on our protest, then we continue to stand in solidarity, and we don't risk simply falling to the delayed condolences after the atrocity, but instead commit ourselves to present solidarity. And what I'll say about the BDS movement, what I'll say about the international boycott movement, I look to where the oppressor seeks to silence and seeks to rob the people of an opportunity to resist. And if the BDS movement was not as powerful as it is, then you wouldn't see all of these attempted laws at the federal and state level in the United States to suppress it. If the BDS movement was not that powerful, then you wouldn't see international corporations panicking, as some of them are crumbling under the pressure of the people. And so this is the greatest source of power that the people have, is ethical spending, is ethical pursuits, is to make sure that we do not allow ourselves to be willingly complicit, even if our tax dollars are used, but to be willingly complicit in the occupation and to demonstrate to bad actors in all of these spaces that we will penalize them with the power that's been given to us. And we do believe that just like with our brethren in South Africa, there will be a domino effect, and we will see, God willing, in our lifetime, justice served and our people standing victorious and resilient.
And as Nelson Mandela famously said, if there is injustice anywhere, there's injustice everywhere, alluding to the issue of Palestine. To you, finally, Professor Link, you have the final say on this panel. Having heard everything you have today, if the so-called international community fails the people of Palestine today, and there's every sign that they already have, but if they do ultimately, if the international legal system fails to uphold the norms and principles and rules of international law and human rights and humanitarian law, what will it mean for our futures? How important, how critical is this moment?
I'm going to turn the question around a little bit because I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I want to put a defense of international law and say the problems we're having now is not with international law, it's with our international political architecture. The ICC and the ICJ don't have their own armies and their own police to be able to enforce it. That depends in large part on either political cooperation or on the Security Council. And we already know where the blockage of the Security Council is. And let's look back 31 years. We've had an Oslo peace process that began in 1993. That Oslo peace process could have been based on international law. Had it been based on international law, we would have had a genuine Palestinian state 25 years ago. Instead, it was based on what we call realpolitik. Who has the most power? And there is an extraordinary imbalance of power militarily, economically, territorially, and militarily and territorially between Israel and the Palestinians. The only area between Israel and the Palestinians where there is equity is in demography. There's 7.5 million Palestinians that live between the river and the sea. There's 7.5 million Israeli Jews who live between the river and the sea. They have to have a common future together. The only way that's going to wind up working if it's based on the rule of law, on human rights, on equality and shared prosperity.
Can they have peace and coexistence without justice and accountability?
Can we have peace and coexistence?
Can Palestinians and Israelis have coexistence and a peaceful joint future without justice and accountability for Palestinians? Will we see it? How do they get out of this, mess?
Yeah, there's only two choices that go forward. Either it's going to be a genuine two-state solution that is consistent with international law based on the 1967 borders, and we're going to see a showdown on that issue next September because the United Nations General Assembly in this September gave a 12-month deadline for Israel to completely end its occupation, to completely evacuate all of its settlers by the middle of September 2025. We are now going to see probably one of the greatest crises in the United Nations when that doesn't happen, and I'm afraid to say the odds of that happening are almost nil, particularly with the new administration coming in. But the defense of international law is that it winds up creating an equal playing field between Israelis and Palestinians. It takes away this military, economic, territorial advantages that Israel winds up having. And keep in mind, we already have that rarest of diplomatic commodities. We have virtually a wall-to-wall international consensus with respect to the application of international law. We just have to put it into effect. We just have to push that political will.
Just, if it was only as simple as that, but absolutely, it's not in what we have, but in how we actually implement the laws that we have. Thank you so much, Professor Link, Dr. Suleiman, Professor Badar, Professor Yüksel, Judge Adjus, and thank you all very much for being with us. Thank you.